Very good afternoon, everyone. Sushant Ring Rajput is here. Okay. Very good afternoon. Very good afternoon. Ananya, good to see you. Good afternoon to you as well. Okay, so in furtherance of our discussions on the Independence Day special series that we are bringing for all of you for 4 days, starting from the 12th. We had gotten off and we're going to continue till tomorrow evening. In fact, today evening also we have a couple of interesting quizzes today and tomorrow. So we will of course continue with those things. And for today's session, we do have India's freedom struggle, and basically we'll go through the entire chronology of the freedom struggle as quickly as possible. We will go through all the important highlights of the entire freedom movement while we wait for the celebration of the 75th Freedom Day and 75th Independence Day um, tomorrow. Right? Okay, some other people have also joined in. Tanuja, Zahag and Nityank. Aha, I see. Hi, Sophia, Abhiman, Kavi, Trasik, Kamaljeet, Shambhavi, Abhi, Movies, Malik is also here. Very good afternoon to all of you. Very good afternoon to all of you. Aarti Kashyap. Hi, Aarti. How are you? Okay, so today is last but one day, right? Tomorrow is going to be the last day for using the code Azadi50, right? Which not only gives you a flat 50% discount, but an extra 75% validity on all the Gradeup super subscriptions. So it's a major change, and for the first time that we are introducing this massive sale, right? Enhance your knowledge regarding the formation of India and its constitution. Of course, we are, like I said, 4 virtual days, right, of India at 75, and the evolution of various Indian laws is what is happening right now. And tomorrow we are going to conclude this series with a quiz in the evening as well. For those of you who are making up your minds in relation to joining some of our courses, we do have the CLAT 2022 repeaters course as well as the CLAT 2022 comprehensive course in both English and bilingual languages, and of course the comprehensive course for the batch of 2023, right? Some of you who are early birds and are really looking to prepare as quickly as possible, we do have the batch 3 for which enrollments are still going on. So do make the most of each of these things, right? Pitambar, Shivam, very good morning. तो क्या अब afternoon हो चुका है शिवम? So good afternoon to you, Pitambar. Very good afternoon to you as well. Right. So of course, most of you know that the British came to India in and around the mid 1700s, right, through the British East India Company, right? And once the East India Company took on various of these kings and various princely states and so on, there was a little bit of consolidation, and the British government then took power from the British East India Company. And one of the first retaliatory measures that we could really see, okay, is the revolt of 1857. Massive uprising that happened. The British call it the Sepoy Mutiny, but in India we understand that it is the first war of independence. It is the first war of independence. Most of you know about the cartridges, which was the main trigger point, which was supposed to be used by the soldiers. It had both beef as well as pork, which you had to tear off with your own teeth. So it was an unholy alliance kind of a thing for both Hindus as well as Muslims, and it kind of unified them in the cause against the British Empire. One of the main political causes, of course, was the doctrine of lapse, right? That if any king or anyone died, without any successor, without any legal heirs, then the property or the entire kingdom even would lapse to the British Empire, and that was one of the major political causes. There were other economic causes like the heavy taxations, discrimination in terms of the taxation policy in relation to Indian products compared to foreign products, and so which affected pretty much everybody, right? It affected pretty much everybody, and we have, of course, had major areas where these revolts happened. Of course, it happened in Delhi as well, where Bahadur Shah Zafar, Bahadur Shah II, that is, was really part of the whole process. In Banaras, it was Liaquat Ali who was leading it. Nana Sahib, Azimullah Khan, Tantia Tope in Kanpur. Maharani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, of course, is through the course of the 1857 War of Independence in Bareilly, in Awadh. There were a lot of these protests, etc., that were really going on with quite a bit of strength, right? With quite a bit of not just protest kind of an energy, but also use of military force that happened against the British, right? Military discrimination, of course, was also happening, and Indian soldiers were paid low salaries, and they could not rise above the rank of Subedar and were racially insulted, and a lot of these things happened, right? And the most famous one, which like I said, I think all of you all of you would have already known, right? You would have already known that this cartridge problem, right? This cartridge problem, which had animal fat, including beef as well as pork, became a very, very focal point for Indian soldiers, right? So ये भी खैर एक हुआ था. The Nizam of Hyderabad, the Maharaja of Jodhpur, and the Scindias of Gwalior, the Holkars of Indore, and a lot of these kings, right, ultimately provided support to the British. And without that support, I think we would have already gotten our independence a long time back. But khair, theek hai, because of all of these internal conflicts that we had with our own kings and princely states and so on, ultimately we could not achieve what we really wanted to achieve. We could not achieve final independence or Purn Swaraj ka sangharsh जो है आगे चलता रहा. Let's see how the story goes on. The impact, of course, was major. There was major impact that happened. The control of the Indian administration was completely passed on to the British Crown by the Government of India Act 1858, right? And the reorganization of the army also had to be done. And after the revolt, after this particular freedom war, the British began some poisonous policies. One of the biggest poisons that still haunts our great nation is the communal divide, the seeds of which were sown way back in the mid 19th century, right? The political impact was, of course, ultimately the Indian National Congress was established and all of those things happened, right? But beech mein kuch establishments before the INC also had happened, right? The Indian Society, the Indian League, Indian Association, London Indian Society, East Indian Society, ये बहुत सारे societies establish किए गए, right? You would know that a lot of these societies perhaps. And finally, of course, we have the National Conference, etc. जिसके बाद Alan Octavian Hume had ultimately established the Indian National Congress, which became the leading kind of force in our ultimate pursuit of Indian independence and Purn Swaraj and so on and so forth. So rise of nationalism in India, of course, also was an impact, right? The people themselves started feeling the whole brunt of the British Empire, started feeling कि सही बात है, ये तो हम क्या ही कर रहे हैं, अपने देश को दे चुके हैं, ऐसा हो गया, वैसा हो गया, right? The kings who supported the British, of course, had a different opinion, right? The kings who had supported the British, of course, had a different opinion, but ultimately that spirit, once it began, became slowly very difficult to to control, right? Alan Octavian Hume, a retired civil servant in the British government, took the initiative to form an all India organization. This is the Indian National Congress, right? The history of the Indian national movement, of course, can be divided into three important phases. The phase of moderate nationalism, when the Congress continued to be loyal to the British Crown from 1885 to 1905, almost 2 decades after its establishment. Also, by and large, we were still working with the British Empire, trying to figure out if we can manage, right? If we can manage कि ठीक है ब्रिटिश क्राउन से झगड़ा भी ना करना पड़े, war ना करना पड़े, and still achieve a certain degree of equality, freedom, and so many things. But in 1905, one of the major events that happened, right? One of the major events that happened was the partition of Bengal, where Lord Curzon, right? Lord Curzon was responsible for the partition of Bengal. And in 1905, the Banaras Session by the INC happened, the Swadeshi movement, the boycott movement, all of these things, right? अगले ही साल Muslim League का भी formation हो गया, and the Surat split happened immediately after that. तब तक मतलब मामला ऑलरेडी काफी सीरियस हो चुका है, राइट? द मॉर्लेमेंटो रिफॉर्म्स हैपेंड इन दिल्ली दरबार, where the King George V of England had come and visited and tried to resolve some of these things, and then enter Mahatma Gandhi, right? After the Home Rule movement, we have the Lucknow Pact, and begins in 1917. The age of Mahatma Gandhi, of course, begins with the Champaran Satyagraha. So many of these other satyagrahas and movements that happened, and the Calcutta Session was followed through. जिसमें भी हमने बहुत सारे slogans, बहुत सारे important decisions continued to happen. The Kheda Satyagraha again was led by the Mahatma Gandhi. Ahmedabad Mill Strike, the Rowlatt Act, which is the Government of India Act of 1919, came as a consolidatory step, right? Came as a major consolidation for Lord Dalhousie employed the doctrine of lapse. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. हाँ, compliment late हो गया. ठीक है, sorry guys, I was not looking at the chat box too much. But that's correct. Lord Curzon is partition of Bengal, मैंने कहा था. Lord Curzon doctrine of lapse नहीं बोला है. Doctrine of lapse is of course Lord Dalhousie, right? Okay. So Rowlatt Act, or the Government of India Act, in 1919 we have the very famous incident of the Jallianwala Bagh, which ultimately led to the Khilafat Movement. 1920, things have gotten really serious by now, right? The non-cooperation movement, the formation of the Swaraj Party, followed by the Gandhiji's session, right, where he addressed, and the call for Purn Swaraj, right? The call for Purn Swaraj happened as early as 1929. In the Lahore Session, the call for Purn Swaraj basically had happened, right? Sarojini Naidu, of course, Nightingale of the East, had already been appointed as a representative of the Indian government. I mean, Indian government in the sense of the Indian people, to represent India in some of the conferences, etc., at the world level, to talk with the British government, and so on. 1930, we have the very famous Dandi March, and in 1935, the last consolidating legislation, right? Again, history में आप काफ़ी सारी important चीज़ें इसके बारे में भी पढ़ेंगे कि Government of India Act 1935 के furtherance में, in fact, our Independence Act, and even today in terms of the Government of India का जो current structure है, right? Of course, we now have our own constitution, right? But वो Constitution of India, maybe there are many of these philosophies and many of these structures of governance which are from the 1935 Act itself, right? In 1939, formation of the All India Forward Bloc, because World War II had broken out, right? World War II had broken out, and we have Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and his movement away from the British. and from the conservative or the moderate conversations that we were having, as the Congress was having with the British Empire, right, wo hum chhod ke aage badhenge, right. Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, took his own different path. In 1942, we had the Quit India movement, followed by the Cripps Mission, where we tried to, I mean, the British tried to do a lot of settlements and so on. And in 1942, of course, my favorite leader of all time and the beginning of the INA, Indian National Army, or the Azad Hind Fauj, right, happened in 1942, where Subhash Chandra Bose ultimately declared war against the British Empire as well as the United States of America. In 1947, we have the Revolt Plan, the cabinet mission to finalize the terms of Indian independence, including the terms of the partition of India, which were ultimately the Lord Mountbatten Plan in 1947, and the British Parliament passed the Indian Independence Act, which not only gave independence to India, but also, as most of you know, resulted in the partition of India as well, right? So 14th August 1947 is today, that is when Pakistan celebrates its Independence Day, and tomorrow on the 15th of August, kya freedom at midnight, no? As the world sleeps, India awakens into a freedom and bliss. That, of course, Nehru was a little mistaken, because the world was not sleeping when India became independent, because it was morning in New York, it was afternoon in South Africa. So I mean, the world wasn't really asleep, right? The New York Stock Exchange was already trading, and so on. So let's quickly look at the timeline again, just to do a quick review, right? East and West Bengal. Even today, we have West Bengal, which is part of India. Mamata Banerjee is the chief minister. East Bengal is now ultimately became East Pakistan. And then, of course, East Bengal now is a sovereign nation in itself. That is the nation of Bangladesh. Right, partition of Bengal by Lord Curzon, of course. The decision to split Bengal came in July, and by October 16th, after Lord Curzon claimed that Bengal was too large to be governed effectively, the province of Bengal was divided into two provinces, West and East Bengal. West and East Bengal. The government, of course, stated that the reason is administrative reasons, right? Reason was administrative reasons at the end of the day. Of course, we all know that there were certain other purposes, like the religious divide that the British really wanted to establish and wanted to continue with. Right, Banaras Session, Gopal Krishna Gokhale was the president of the INC at that time. He presided over the session. This was also the time when the bitter differences had arisen between his group of moderates and what are known as the extremists. कि अब और ये सब सिर्फ कांग्रेस गवर्नमेंट से, सिर्फ ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट से बात करके नहीं हो पाएगा. We need to take one step beyond this conversational mode. We need to take decisive action. We need to start taking decisive action. आजकल 12 बजे भी कोई नहीं सोता है mostly. Yeah, that's true. Samarth, Subhash, yeah, okay. Swarnendu Adhikari, sir, I've gotten offers from Amity, Noida and Keat for BBA LLB, so please suggest which one. I think Amity, Noida will be just a little better than KIIT. It's, of course, not too much of a difference, but yeah, I think Amity, Noida is a slightly better choice there, right? Okay, see, All India Muslim League, of course, was established in 1906. The party arose out of a literary movement begun at Aligarh Muslim University and was formed in Dhaka, which is now in Bangladesh. The Nawab of Dhaka, Salimullah, Hakim Ajmal Khan, and of course Sir Aga Khan were all the founders of the Muslim League. Later on, of course, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the most famous Muslim League leader, later on, he is the one who sort of took lead and took control and so on. The Surat split is finally, the moderates and the extremists alag alag raste apne chale gaye, right? The extremist camp was led by Lal, Bal and Pal, right, which most of you know. This is Lal is Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal is Bal Gangadhar Tilak, and Pal is Bipin Chandra Pal, right? So these three ultimately led the extremist faction of the Congress, and the complete split essentially had happened, right? The Minto-Morley reforms, also called the Minto-Morley Reforms, Indian Councils Act of 1909, which ultimately created an elective principle to the membership of the imperial and local legislative councils in India. And the act was formulated by John Morley, right, who was the Secretary of State for India from 1905 to 1910, right? The coronation darbar of King George V and Queen Mary was held in the purpose-built Coronation Park in Delhi in December 1911. The purpose of the darbar was to honor King George V as the King Emperor of India, but it was also at the darbar that he announced the transfer of the capital of British from Calcutta to the current capital, that is of Delhi, right? Because you know that for a long time Calcutta was also the capital of India, right? The Home Rule League and the Home Rule Movement, Bal Gangadhar Tilak and Annie Besant, right? And Annie Besant, both of them major portion of the Indian freedom movement. In 1921, the All India Home Rule League changed its name to Swaraj Sabha, right? Swaraj Sabha के नाम से आगे हम अपना movement को कंटिन्यू कर रहे थे. 1916 is when it all happened in Lucknow, and Lucknow is always close to my heart because that's where I live right now as well. Of course, मैं यहाँ पे जहाँ बैठा हूँ वहाँ तो सिर्फ जंगल हुआ करता था because Gomti Nagar did not exist in 1916. The Lucknow Pact was signed after both the Congress and the Muslim League realized that they will have to come together and jointly demand self-rule for India from British rulers. Annual sessions of both the parties were held in Lucknow. The pact was adopted by the Congress on December 29th and by the Muslim League on December 31st, 1916, demanding of self-rule, local self-governance, right? This is all basically the 1916 Lucknow Pact. And we also, by that time, we have the entry of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was representing the Muslim League at that point of time. गांधी जी की एंट्री हो गई है 1917. The first major Satyagraha movement which was led by Gandhi ji was the Champaran Satyagraha, which gave direction to India's youth and to the freedom struggle. You know, we cannot keep tolerating all these kind of injustices, right, that the British government is throwing at us. कहीं ना कहीं एक आवाज उठानी पड़ेगी, right? The Calcutta session, of course, were again very important because the conciliation between moderates and extremists का पूरा effort चल रहा था, right? Dadabhai Naoroji's address formed a remarkable departure from the conventional type of Congress address. Here he sponsored the new program of the Congress which had been advocated by the extremists. So कहीं ना कहीं एक balance between the moderates जो सिर्फ बातें करना चाहते थे with the British to come to a conclusion, and the extremists who wanted to resort to violence as a means of declaring war to ultimately achieve the purpose of independence, right? This how to do this reconciliation, वही पूरा effort essentially चल रहा था, right? The Kheda Satyagraha as well as the Ahmedabad Mill Satyagraha, etc., all of it is again led by Gandhi ji, right? Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi is the one who led Champaran, the Kheda Satyagraha as well as Ahmedabad Mills because of the major tax breakouts, right? कहीं disease हो रहा था, कहीं famine हो रहा था, कहीं taxes का problem था, and these were all exploitation ultimately of the labor class, of farmers, and these things were happening. The involvement of Gandhiji in the strike with his philosophy of satyagraha and non-violence is basically something which began to take a lot of concrete shape, कि विदाउट वायलेंस भी सिर्फ नॉन वायलेंस के थ्रू हम किसी को कुछ मजबूर कर सकते हैं, कुछ ऐसा कर सकते हैं कि ब्रिटिश एम्पायर नीड्स टू अग्री विथ अस. दिस इज ऑल द अर्ली डेज, राइट? चंपारण खेड़ा सत्याग्रह एज वेल एज द अहमदाबाद मिल स्ट्राइक्स. ओके, सर सिडनी राउलैट की डायनामिक एंट्री हो चुकी है अब, and he introduced among other things, right, the major law of sedition, which already existed, but it gave a lot of strengthening to the government कि इसमें आप कोई भी अगर कुछ गवर्नमेंट के अगेंस्ट बोल रहा है, कुछ गवर्नमेंट को अपोज कर रहा है, सत्याग्रह हो रहा है, ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है, then you can arrest those people, right, even without any judicial proceedings. Even without any judicial proceedings, you can continue to arrest them for a period of up to 2 years. So that's a massive change in the legal structure that was recommended and implemented by the Rowlatt Act. And uske baad, of course, the Montague Chelmsford reforms, right? Lord Chelmsford and the Secretary of State, that is Edwin Montague, they had introduced the single Indian member of Central Legislative Council, right? Rowlatt Act में था, फिर भी हमने in any case पास करके Government of India Act 1919 के through lot of these things were implemented, right? Including, like I said, जो हमारे sedition के laws थे उसको strengthen करके और वगैरह वगैरह. World War I के end के बाद this specific laws were ultimately passed. Okay, all of you remember General Dyer, right? Brigadier Reginald Dyer had opened fire that resulted in the death of 1,000+ people, right? More than 1,000 people were simply shot dead in Jallianwala Bagh, which is, I think, one of the darkest of all these wild kind of atrocities that the British Empire had rained down on the good, kind and innocent Indian people at that point of time. So, and this is one of those incidents which is, I don't think we will ever forget the gross violation of human rights that the British, with all of their lectures of humanity and morality, had actually inflicted on innocent civilians in India, right? Anyway, the Khilafat movement also at the same time, right, the Khilafat movement also had started to pick up quite a bit of pace, and the Indian Muslims, of course, were trying to coordinate with the Ottoman Sultan to declare him as the Caliph or the Khalifa of Islam. And following the breakup of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the war, ultimately, right, ho nahi paya, but attempt, the war here is World War I, right? Here it is, of course, World War I. So ho to nahi paya, but it was a good and decent attempt, right? And then we have the non-cooperation movements, सिर्फ एक जगह पर नहीं, कई जगह पर, right? And final trigger point तो खैर जलियांवाला बाग ही था, कि जलियांवाला बाग के बाद गांधी जी, of course, created this and launched this massive movement, right, where British से हम कोई cooperation नहीं करेंगे, right? We will not do any cooperation. And in 1922, जब non-cooperation movement चल ही रहा था, right, Motilal Nehru, this is Jawaharlal Nehru's father, right, and Chittaranjan Das were named as the Congress Khilafat Swaraj Party in 1922. The Congress session held at Gaya in Bihar and oversawn by C.R. Das rejected the suggestion for entering the representing bodies, and broadly the Swaraj Party and the Khilafat Congress Khilafat Swaraj Party, broadly known as the Swaraj Party, in 1923 में उसको फाइनली मर्ज करके हम साथ में चला पाए. इनिशियली नहीं हो पा रहा था, ऑफ कोर्स देयर वाज क्वाइट अ बिट ऑफ डिसएग्रीमेंट कि लीडरशिप का क्या करेंगे, किसका डिसीजन फाइनल होगा, हाउ विल वी कोऑर्डिनेट अमंगस्ट ईच अदर, क्या हमारी फिलॉसफीज मैच कर रही है या नहीं कर रही है. खैर अल्टीमेटली we could get it done. 1924 in Belgaum, the Indian National Congress held its 39th session, and Gandhiji was the president of the Congress on only one occasion, and that session was this particular session in 26th and 27th of December 1924, right? Because 1925 May, the first woman, right, was appointed as the governor of Uttar Pradesh after India achieved independence in 47. Of course, all of you know the Nightingale, Sarojini Naidu, right? She was India's first woman governor and remained in that position till her death in 1949. She was elected as the president of the Indian National Congress in 1925 and also was the first woman to assume that position. Of course, uske baad there have been more women, whether it is Sonia Gandhi or it is Indira Gandhi, both of whom have also become president of the INC later on, right? Later on to ye bhi hua. The non-cooperation movement ultimately हो नहीं पाया, right? Simon Go Back के posters सबने देखे हैं, right? You've all read about the Sir John Simon Commission, which was asked to go back. Calcutta में there were major protests, right? And ultimately Lala Lajpat Rai, right, the Sher-e Punjab, it is during the course of these Simon Commission protests that Lala Lajpat Rai actually died in the lathi charge. And you know his famous last words. All of you remember Lala Lajpat Rai's famous last words: every blow on my head will act as the final nails on the coffin of the great British Empire, right? Very famous last words when when Lalaji died, right? So anyway, that's something that happened. And 1929 Lahore Session was the first session where the Congress Party ultimately made the call of Purn Swaraj, right? Purn Swaraj ka call 1929 Lahore Session mein aaya tha. So that's of course something which was very landmark, क्योंकि पहली बार एब्सोल्यूट इंडिपेंडेंस की बात हो रही थी, लेके रहेंगे आजादी, राइट? दांडी मार्च फॉर द सॉल्ट सत्याग्रह, राइट, कि हम नमक पे टैक्स नहीं देंगे, हम खुद नमक की माइनिंग कर रहे हैं, हम खुद नमक ला रहे हैं, तो वी विल नॉट पे यू टैक्स ऑन द सॉल्ट. That is the 1930 Dandi March of the Salt Satyagraha. Again, this is of course an example of the severe implications of the movement of non-violence, which ultimately existed, right? 1935 Government of India Act, very important legislation based on the report by a joint select committee led by Lord Linlithgow, which was set up in both houses of the parliament, that is the House of Commons and the House of Lords in the British Parliament. यहाँ पर भी हमारा Parliament of India भी बन चुका था तब तक, right? Round table conferences भी चल रहे थे, कुछ compromises ultimately किए गए, and finally World War II के around we have on June 22, 1939, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose formed the All India Forward Bloc as a left-wing nationalist political party in India. नेताजी की एंट्री अब हो चुकी है, सुभाष चंद्र बोस. August offer the Advisory War Council and the Dominion status for the first time. Right, dominion status means that there will be a certain degree of autonomy that the Indian territory will ultimately enjoy, and this happened in 1940. But by 1942, the Quit India movement was started by Mahatma Gandhi, right, asking for a complete end to the British rule in India, which was followed by the Cripps mission to obtain Indian cooperation, right? Non-cooperation movement को हम कैसे खत्म करें? It was headed by Sir Richard Stafford Cripps, a Labour minister in Winston Churchill's coalition government in Great Britain. So how do we resolve this, right? How can we end the non-cooperation movement? ये बात करने के लिए Sir Richard Stafford Cripps had come to India, right? But in the meanwhile, we had of course already moved on. ये तो बात करने तो गांधी and friends और इन सब से कांग्रेस वालों से बात करने के लिए, but in the meanwhile the Azad Hind Fauj, right, under Captain Mohan Singh, right, and Subhash Chandra Bose, which had already started coordinating जो भी prisoners of war थे with the British Army in so many other countries, right, so many other countries में भी जाके, all of you know that's I mean Subhash Bose's war on England is a separate discussion in itself, right? That's a separate I think entire lecture, and maybe even one lecture kya, two lectures kya. I think unlimited amount of lectures will perhaps not be enough to do justice to the greatness of the man, the vision, the mission, or anything that ultimately Netaji was able to achieve, which I believe personally is the ultimate thing that led to the independence of India as well. Anyway, 1945, we have the Revolt Plan, right? Formation of the new executive council at the center, in which all the members except the viceroy and the commander-in-chief would be Indian, and all portfolios except defense were to be under the control of Indian members. British nahi honge. And 1946 May, to discuss the transfer of powers from the British government to the Indian leadership with the aim of preserving India's unity and granting its independence, the 1946 cabinet mission came to India. And in 1947, the Mountbatten Plan, you can see two famous people sitting with Lord Mountbatten here. One is Chachaji and the other is Chachaji's friend Muhammad Ali Jinnah, both of whom became the respective heads of the Indian government and Pakistani government after, I don't know what phrase to use, after they regretfully agreed with the partition, or they high-fived each other and agreed on the partition. However you want to look at it, depending on how you evaluate your own versions of history, right? But the truth is, partition did happen under the Mountbatten Plan. India and Pakistan were ultimately created through the Indian Independence Act, right? And the two independent dominions of India and Pakistan were ultimately created. And on 15th of August 1947, the British Empire had left, right? Following the Indian independence movement led by Gandhi. Well, I don't know if I completely agree with this particular conclusion. I think there was a huge role, and perhaps even a more important role, that was played by the Azad Hind Fauj, the Indian National Army, and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. But anyway, whether it was Gandhi or Bose or both, ultimately India did become independent, and tomorrow we will complete 75 years of that glorious occasion, right? Tomorrow we will complete 75 years of that glorious occasion. And with that, I am also going to wish all of you a very happy Independence Day in advance. No, it should be Jawaharlal Nehru is also here. Congrats to you, Shatendra. What did I miss? Sir, मेरी आ गई CLAT में. All thanks to you. अरे Shatendra, how much rank? All thanks to you का क्या है? सारी मेहनत तुमने की होगी. मैंने तो सिर्फ कुछ बताया है, कुछ नहीं बताया है. No, and sir, India would have been the most populous country without the partition. Yeah, that's true. I think there was also other things, perhaps. So yeah, that's that. Anyway, guys, thank you very much. Have a lovely day. We have also declared today to be, I think, remembrance of Pakistan, partition horrors remembrance day or something. This is 14th of August, and of course tomorrow is Independence Day. Anyway, 3 cheers to the great Republic of India. Bharat Mata ki Jai, Jai Hind. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you very much.